So I know. If the doors are closed, I know if that works. Probably yes, it works. So we'll start a little bit late, but I'm really delighted to open this third panel of the Western Balkans Summit in EBRD, where we will talk about soft connectivity. Quite a lot of people said how important it was this morning. The president of EBRD, obviously, but also the EU presidency, our British colleague, and also all the Western Balkans prime ministers echoed how important this agenda was. And the idea of this afternoon is to go a little bit deeper in it and to understand also the challenges and the implication that ambition has. For those who are not very familiar, soft connectivity, and behind the word, which is a little bit, probably you could say, a jargon word, there are very concrete things: harmonization of legislations, removal of non-tariff barriers, improvement of the depth and horizontal links between capital markets in the different countries, digitalization, strengthening the business environment in the region, and, for example, facilitating foreign investment. I'm sure we will not exhaust this whole agenda today, but the idea is to start a structured dialogue on these issues related to the soft connectivity, a little bit in the same fashion as the Western Balkans Summit in EBRD and the Berlin process have in the last few years tackled the infrastructure connectivity, the hard connectivity if you want, and brought along better coordination between the key stakeholders and recipients, prioritization of key regional projects, and most importantly, also increased capacity of funding and coordinated capacity for funding. And I think many of the projects we sign and we celebrate also today, as in the last weeks and months, are the result of this more coordinated approach to hard connectivity. And probably one day we can hope that Western Balkan Summit will be as much about soft connectivity and policy framework set in at regional level than physical connectivity. We are a bank, as you know, so we are very much focused on investment. And from EBRD's perspective, the most important element of the regional economic area whose concept was endorsed by the regional leaders in Trieste, with strong support from the origin, I would say even paternity in some way, from the European Commission, is establishing a single investment space in the Western Balkans. And we will try to define together today what is needed for this. EBRD has already invested in soft connectivity, so it's not something completely new. And in the coming period, we plan to significantly increase investment in the digital economy, which is so important for the region. And this meaning a lot of things, and inter alia, bringing also broadband to communities, sometimes which are remote from these infrastructures, supporting privatization of operators to increase competition in provision of digital services, but also investing in innovative companies that can thrive with advanced technologies and telecommunications. And this goes alongside many other important work we are doing on policy reforms and governance, including the EBRD-funded Regional Chamber of Commerce. So that was a little bit just the backdrop of our discussion, and we will dwell on the critical different aspects with the help of our very brilliant and distinctive and distinguished panelists. To my right, the Prime Minister of Serbia, Ana Brnabić, who was the first person who came to my mind when I started looking for somebody who could talk about digital economy with passion and authority. And for those who don't know, Serbia, and Ana is the champion of the digital agenda in the Western Balkans, putting it courageously at the top of the platform, her platform, when before getting elected, being elected as Prime Minister of Serbia. And it is very interesting now, probably, that Ana shares with all of us where Serbia is in the deployment of this plan. Also the challenges which are the ones Serbia is confronted to in deploying this agenda, but also how this experience can be used in the wider context of the region. To my left is Director General for Neighbourhood and Enlargement of the European Commission, Christian Danielson, who will start our conversation with sharing Brussels' latest thinking with respect to the ambition project of creating regional economic area in the Western Balkans and the strategy the European Union want to develop in the next month and years in this region. Marco Caddes, I don't have to introduce you because you are more or less the star of the summit, also in a very concrete way, since we launched earlier today in the presence of the 6th Prime Minister of the region a unique online regional investment platform, the first product, in fact, of the newly established Regional Chamber of Commerce. And you chair the board of this Regional Chamber of Commerce. And Marco, you will talk about how local businesses can be the engine of regional integration. And I understand that you will share also your time with Vanko Obradovic from the Serbian Business Registry Agency, who will talk about another EBRD support project, the Regional Business Registry. I understand in a quite lively presentation, using the best tools to be even more convincing. Our good partner from the World Bank, Linda van Gelder, head of the Western Balkans in the World Bank, will talk about challenges of strengthening business environment. You may have noticed also how deeply the World Bank has been in looking at the very concrete aspects of business environment in the different countries and with regional perspectives. Goran Svilanovic, Secretary General of the Sarajevo-based Regional Cooperation Council, will talk about corruption, the rule of law, and corruption being a phenomenon which is unfortunately widespread in the region. Some would say that there are even countries outside the region which are confronted to that. Obviously it's true, but it's perceived at least as a key obstacle to for investment. So it will be interesting also if you can share with us and identify the regional potential approaches to tackling corruption, best practices, which at least we as EBRD are trying to support in each country, but obviously we can go further than what has been achieved. Last but not least, Mattia Romali, who is Managing Director for Economics, Policy and Governance in EBRD, will try to look at the challenge of soft connectivity from the eyes and through the eyes of foreign investors based on the bank's latest research and practical experience. So I suggest that each panelist makes his or her comment in for 5 to 7 minutes, and afterwards we'll have an open discussion based on the questions you may have for each panelist. So maybe Christian, you want to start with the regional economic area and the strategy of the European Union.
Thank you, Pierre, and thank you for letting me start. And I cannot abstain from trying to sort of set out a bit both the general framework and then coming into the regional economic area, because I think they belong together. And the reason I say that is that the Commission very recently put on the table a strategy for the Western Balkans. And that is, I think, politically from the EU's point of view, will be very much the framework in which we will work now. And I assume that it also will be a welcome element for the partners in the Western Balkans to work within. And what this strategy does is that it makes 3 things very clear. One is the European perspective for the whole of the Western Balkans. There should be no doubt about that. And I think that also provides the incentive for doing what is called for, and that's the second element. It sets out very clear what is called for in order for the countries, irrespective of which country we talk about, in order to move forward on this track. And that boils down to reforms in 3 areas in particular. It boils down to reforms in rule of law. It boils down on the reforms of the economy, and that is very much what we're going to discuss today. And it boils down also to the regional cooperation, and in particular, the issue of reconciliation, which is so essential for these countries to be able to tackle the legacy of the past. And the third element it sets out very clearly what the European Union is prepared to do in order to support these efforts. And that boils down to 6 flagship initiatives, which also is something that we're going to more or less discuss today. It has to do with the issue of rule of law. It has to do with the issue, and that's the second, of security and migration, where we have very joint interest. It has to do with socio-economic development, which is what we touch upon today. It has to do with connectivity, also linked to what we do today. It has to do with the digital agenda and moving that forward. And it has to do with reconciliation. And all of that boils down to 57 concrete measures for the period 2018, 2019, 2020. And underpinning this strategy is money. So we foresee an additional 500 million in grants, which will come in, as well as setting up a specific guarantee instrument to make the investments, in particular from private sector, more prevalent than what we have seen today. I think it's important to set up that for seeing what is in fact the discussion, which is the regional element. The way we see it, and I think this is also what has come out very much from the whole discussions on the WB6 process, or we call Berlin process, is that the regional cooperation is part and parcel of this whole process, of the European perspective. And that the regional economic area being one essential element to together with the other elements of that process, which is the connectivity you mentioned, but also the people to people. Now, the real economic area is a nice term, but it has gone down already into something very concrete, which not least Goran has been working very much on. Boils down to 4 elements: trade facilitation, services, and not least important, which came up in the panel this morning, the non-tariff barriers. There's a World Bank report, I think, from last year, setting out the cost of what is not happening in terms of what is happening at the border controls. And I think one of the speakers of the Prime Minister brought it up. And that is something which could provide substantive potential for increased prosperity, increased growth, but also increased competitiveness of these economies in order for them to be able also to be more efficiently working on the European market. The second element is investment, and that's linked to it. More investments will come once the market looks more prosperous, once it is more ready to take on investments that can work not only on the Western Balkan market, but also beyond. And that boils down to, apart from the attractions, to get the real investment dialogue between the countries concerned, to also look on the investment frameworks, and not least to this term, smart specialization, which is very important, to see to where can things be done best and how to see that actually happening as well. The third element is the mobility, also linked to the whole issue of competitiveness. And there it's to see to that the labor market in the Western Balkan becomes more performing. Recognition of diplomas is going to be one essential element in that context. And finally is the digital, which I will leave to the Prime Minister to go into the details of, but which obviously is extremely, extremely important. Lots of stuff has happened here, and there is a movement. The political commitment is there. But there is also here, bureaucrat as I am, I can't abstain from pointing to it, a roadmap. And when I went through that roadmap just before this meeting, there is quite a lot to be done. And I think it's important that that is communicated, the ambitious willingness to move ahead, which is there from the countries' concerns. And that was down to the reforms, issues relating to the harmonization, to the structures that are being set up. It boils down to issues relating to the skills as well, and building up the necessary skills in order to be able to work on these issues in an efficient way. And it boils down to also looking into how the business climate can become much better. And our strategy on this is to support, to give as much support as we can, both in terms of our national dialogue, where this links in very well with the dialogue we have with the partners of Western Balkan when it comes to the concrete either negotiation or the other steps that are taken by those who are not negotiation when it comes to the European perspective. Because this is part of that. It links in when it comes to the areas of free movement of goods. So when it comes to the area of free movement of services, this is what we are talking about. We are doing it also through the financial support, where we are doing it both in a kind of national way, but also through what we call the Western Balkan Investment Framework, where we are quite substantially providing for support in that context. And we are doing it through working with the IFIs, jointly together with you, and with the other IFIs, in order to provide the necessary both the assistance, but also the way giving ideas on how this can be moving forward. Am I optimistic? Very much so. I think what we have seen over the last couple of years when it comes to the regional economic integration, there are big steps that are being taken, setting up the Secretariat of the Transport Community in Belgrade, moving forward on the regional economic plan as such, and so on and so forth. But I think there is a need to constantly look into it, because there are going to be those who say, why should we? And in order to meet those concerns, there needs to be a continuous political pressure, which I think is there, but which also we have a responsibility to see to that it continues to be there.
Thank you very much, Christian, for your optimistic message and also your stress on implementation, which is always welcome. Prime Minister, maybe.
On digitalization,
yes,
I could,
more.
yes, please stop me, because I could talk for like 24 hours straight. But the yes, when the president basically asked me, to give me the mandate to form the government, and when I was thinking about really the focus of the new government, I thought that one thing that we must do, because the previous government under his leadership really established this macroeconomic stability, fiscal consolidation, and a healthy basis for growth. That it is basically on my government, to establish basis for dynamic growth and sustainable growth in the future. Meaning that we have to make a step from where we are today, and that's investment-driven economy, into a innovation-driven economy. And that is really the only way in which we can become a country which is not a country of cheap labor force, which is a country which can also rely on its own resources. And for that, we needed to really step up and take all the opportunities that Industrial Revolution 4.0 is presenting to us. And it's a unique time in which you're living, in which countries which did not really use well the third industrial revolution can catch up and become leaders in the fourth industrial revolution and completely change the paradigm of their growth. And this is what this government is now doing. So I really like to separate this into two different pillars. One is digitalization in the government sector, which is kind of e-government. So introducing as much of electronic services to citizens and businesses as possible. And to me, this really is the answer to all of our key issues in Serbia, but elsewhere in Western Balkans as well. That is the efficiency of the government, the transparency of the government, and it's also the best way to fight corruption. So electronic services provide full transparency. When you have full transparency and you cut the physical contact between business person or a citizen and the government, be it on the republic or the local level, you cut corruption. So this is basically what we are doing in terms of the e-government. And right now we are working on the set of laws to set up the healthy foundation for law on e-businesses, law on e-government, and we are working on these laws now. Well, the law on e-businesses the parliament has passed that last year. By April, we are doing all the secondary legislation and going into the full implementation of this law, meaning the electronic signatures, electronic archiving, e-payments, and so on and so forth, to make doing business in Serbia much more efficient. In terms of so that's the government, but in terms of catching up with the Industrial Revolution 4.0, you really have to start from education. And that's why education is really number 2 priority of this government. And so what we've done is, as of this school year, so September 2017, we've introduced programming and coding as mandatory subjects in the primary schools as of 5th grade, so that's when children are 10. And more importantly, we've done that in partnership with civil society organizations that are doing just that. Thanks to them, I think that right now Serbia has one of the most advanced programming and coding programs in Europe in the 5th and 6th grade. So we are probably the only country, I would say, that is when children are 11 years old, their mandatory subject in primary schools is Scratch and Python program languages. And that is really not thanks to the government, it's thanks to the government being open to letting the civil society in, and civil society has basically given these programs to us. Also, in terms of formal education, we've increased by 20% enrollment at technical universities across Serbia, and we are now continuing this in 2018. For that, we needed to invest a little bit of money into infrastructure, so expanding premises, building new buildings, because they just in order to be accredited, we needed more space for students. But we are also we've started informal education. So we have this, we basically have, we lack about 15,000 people in private sector for the companies, not just IT, but in general to modernize production. And not all of these 15,000 people are people with university education. We estimate that about 3,000 to 4,000 people are people who are kind of very junior level programmers, people who can be retrained. And so we've piloted a retraining program which worked really well. We piloted with 100 people. We are now doing the bigger training for 1,000 people and are working together with the National Employment Service, who's now providing this free training for people, 3 to 6 month courses after these people can actually employ. Firstly, they take initiative of their own lives, change, instead of waiting for jobs, they retrain and find jobs. And secondly, we basically make this push towards more informal education. What's next? Next is certainly, in terms of schools, is digital textbooks. And what's important is connected schools. We call that connected schools program. For that, broadband is essential. So you need to connect all the schools. We've done that last year, but we need a much higher speed internet, broadband connections, much more connectivity. And just for primary schools in Serbia, that is an investment of some 50 million euros into connected schools. And we're probably going to be doing that with European Investment Bank. But the need is so big that we will probably have to work with EBRD and many World Bank and many other international financial institutions. And we have signed the MOU with European Investment Bank. So in the next 3 years, we will invest another additional 50 million euros only into infrastructure for startups and innovation. And that's into science and technology parks, new faculties, co-working spaces, and so on and so forth. When I speak about the opportunity that this provides to us, that also opens up. This also provides answer to one challenge that we have, and that is, if there is one bad thing about European integration of the countries of Western Balkans, and I'm talking about Serbia now, is this brain drain. We have brain drain now, but it will be much bigger problem unless we do something now before we join the EU to make people, and especially highly trained young people, stay in our countries. And for that, we need much more investment into startup companies, small and medium-sized enterprises, research and development institutions, and science. And we're doing it today also through Industrial Revolution 4.0. And we are seeing this trend slowly, I think, although I'm always overly optimistic, but slowly changing. For example, with institutes such as the Physics Institute, fantastic institute in Belgrade. We have now provided this title of the Institute of National Importance. And we are seeing people from postdoc degrees from all over the world starting to come back. Not for the money, just because they're able to connect with similar institutes across Europe and the world, and they have the same equipment. They are basically, and they want to come back. So that is something that we are going to continue investing in. Challenges, and to end with this, Certainly infrastructure, so broadband, you know, it's a huge investment. It needs to be done, especially because co-working spaces and startups can not only be in the major cities like Belgrade and Novi Sad and Niš. You know, we have to enable people in smaller cities and municipalities. If they want to work from there, they should be able to work from there. Human resources. We need to educate much more people. And finally, legislation in terms of access to finance. So that is something that we are, I think, be cooperating with you and the World Bank and everyone else in the future on.
No, but thank you very much for this very inspiring plan, and also the open eyes you have on the challenges and also bottlenecks. You mentioned about developing an ambitious agenda in that field, which is so important, also to give prospect to young people, so in the region. So now I will turn to Marco, maybe. Who can come back also on what has been achieved in terms of around this regional chamber of commerce, and also the ambition ahead of us.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to present today Investment Online Platform. Thank you for your support as the EBRD to jointly develop this product, which is, I have to repeat, it is from the private business community to the private business community product, which means it is actually scanning also the legal frameworks, scanning the soft connectivity. You can say rate it, index it, or wherever, for the private investors, for the private businesses, also in the region, to see where are we now, what is needed to be done. So it is not only a tool for, let's say, attract the investment, or for someone who is, thinking about investing in Southeast Europe or invest in Balkans, but it is also a transparency tool. That's what I mentioned. It is very important to see, because this is about soft connectivity. If we have today discussed about infrastructure, and we've discussed about problems in non-tariff barriers, then we have more kilometers of highways are built in the region. That's simply the fact in the last 4 years, also in Serbia and other countries. But if you see the time spent on the border, they're even higher than before. Why? Because there's more trade, and the infrastructure facilities are still the same, and we have still the same problems that we have 4 years ago. Now, after the last summit in Trieste, where all the governments committed themselves really to the action plan for the regional economic area, that was, I think, the best news for the business community ever, we have to say, because there are concrete measures and concrete steps how to deal with it, with support of a regional cooperation council, where I think we need more to give them more push to really facilitate the whole process, because it is a really different approach between business community and it is normal, and between governments in the local economies, because they're governments, they're elected in some territory, and they choose their political agenda according to the political agenda, so which is normally. But to answer to the challenges that the regional business community has, we need to think differently. We need to think about some institutions which could be transferred on some other level. We need to say, okay, it is not on national level to be decided on, because it cannot be solved on national level. We need to transfer it on to have some compromise to joint institution that we will transfer this kind of certifications, documentation, everything what will facilitate the soft measures. And this is what still we miss a little bit. And I think after the political commitment in Trieste, after all the governments really, and all the prime ministers, and thank you, Anna is one now here, they committed themselves to this. What we need now is really commitment in the operational level. we need resources committed from the governments. It is not only the RCC with their resources who can provide it, it's not possible. We need resources also from the governments. We need budgets which are committed to the establishing of regional economic area, and this is simply the truth. And I think we are going in the good direction in all. I think this decision, political decision from the top, from the prime ministers and the leaders in the region is there. And of course it takes time to be spread because it is difficult. Again, it is between national regulation and, EU needed about 50 years. So it's not so easy. No? And that's what I think it's very, very important to go now into the operational level and to say how can we facilitate it more quickly, because we have no time to wait. And we had today present also investors who are investing in the regional players who are now not national companies, who are the regional companies which are dealing, and they are already thinking in the way which is far away from the national political level and framework. So that is, I think, where we need to go, and that's why also our platform, I think, could provide some support. We cannot solve issues, we cannot solve all the problems, but I think we can provide also help for governments to give them some kind of advice and about what is needed to be done and what is really priority. And that's why I think it's also important maybe to mention my friend Zvonko from Agency for Company Register from Serbia, who also had one additional project which is very connected to our platform, which is actually connecting the whole registries in the region together, so that we will have synergy between the private sector and the institutions. This is what we talk when I talk about we need to facilitate new regional operations, new regional facilitators. That's one of the great ideas how to do it, and maybe Zvonko could present a few ideas about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen. Following the agenda and following the Marco's word, I would like to say that it is a great pleasure for me to present you the outcome of our joint work on the business registries in the region. When we are discussing about the project on the establishing the registry platform among the colleagues in Macedonia, among the bank and under the leadership of the Serbian government, which is very committed to the digital agenda, we start with one motto: if the companies does not admit and accept the frontiers, why the business registry should do? So what can we do to provide the services, business and financial services and information for our companies, and our companies which are not only in Serbia, but the companies who are in all of our region. So a lot of issues are related to the establishing one platform here. But our main idea also was, and another dilemma is, could we provide some, from one hand, information, on the other hand, services, also registration, but also some sort of warning for the companies from with the data from the official databases and everything what is useful for their every day's operational and actual work. So can we provide the data about the personal searches, company profiles? Can we do something to make it easier to reach the necessary information on the market? So we start with the project, and when we are discussing about is one project successful or not, if I may say, after the memorandum signed by between the Serbian government and European Bank, and after the launching the project was related only between Serbian and Macedonian registry. But our colleagues from the region was invited also to join, and today I will use the opportunity to present you a sort of a live search 6 registries we have now Here, 4 of them send us the data selected sets for the purposes of this presentation, and we expect and hope that this year, not hope, but this year, we will have official launch of the official project called Regional Registry Platform on the Western Balkan, but with another registry, 6 or 8 registries I will present you now. We can go, if you don't mind, on our, this is the live search and live version of portal, which means that we will have, can we just switch on? Yeah, thank you very much. This is the front end of our portal, which means that in our case, official registries are, of course, Serbian Business Register Agency, Macedonia. It is Central Registry of Macedonia. Our dear colleagues from Slovenian Registry Agency for the Public Records, IPES. We have colleagues from Albanian National Business Center, and from Bosnia and Herzegovina we have Sarajevo. We have a financial information agency with the data sets, and we have from Banja Luka agency for intermediate IT and financial services. Those agencies are particularly related with the collection of annual accounts and annual reports from the company. So they are legally authorized for the financial information about the companies. Following the presentation in a real time of the registries and companies, among the registries we will have particularly the list and the preview of the companies, their structure, capital, useful information from the region about the investors, because we feel here, we will have here from those 6 partners, 800,000 of companies and entrepreneurs linked on the platform, and we suppose that more than 50,000 of them are interlinked and registered from one jurisdiction to another. So it could be actually very useful for them to use those kind of services. Here on the presentation we can just take some examples. Typing the names of the companies, we can actually reach some services, and so in this case, for example, typing the name of the company Nectar, we can take a look all the companies which are related with that particular name of the company from various registries. In this case, you can see from the selected data sets those names and those companies which are related from various Albanian, Bosnian, etc. registries. So I will now demonstrate, after this web search, I will demonstrate you the way of servicing which can be provided. It's the profile of the companies, additional information. Please don't mind about those prices, because the initial idea is to have initial services free of charge, and from another hand we are testing now. From another hand, we need to have a platform which is self-sustainable, self-financed. So it is not the platform linked to the budget. So for one particular company, we can order some sort of services, which are just, I'm just presenting the model and the way how we can reach that kind of a service. And I am using now the service such as connected entities, for example, to take a look which companies from various registries are connected to this company, then short profile, for example, for one company. One of the services which we are also find very useful, following to the remarks from Mr. Marko Čadež, and the inspiration is to provide a possible link tomorrow with the chamber chamber services is the service which is actually called Find Me a Partner, find a partner on the business activity. So with some criteria such as, I hope you may see because the letters are a little bit small, but it is a country of origin, revenues, number of employees, services, various services here, and net profit, equity capital. There are selecting criteria which are very useful for this purpose. So we can actually take a look for the moment on those services. So short company profile, which I mentioned to you and ordered, means all the identification data, business name data, incorporation data, capital structure, and data about the board members from the companies. The main issue here is that those data are official data, and that is the reliable data. Of course, reliable means from the official data source. Additional service here, when we mention find the partner service, means to have the partners selected by the criteria here, which we are taking. It's matching assorted criteria by the income and the companies which can be chosen from the list of the companies in the real time services. We find it very useful also to present to you the possible service on the person search also, which is very useful. And following that kind of, for example, I can type for this just purpose to some names and the data collected here. On the presentation, you saw that issue about the personal data protection is also followed here in this respect. So on the person search, we can actually select some criteria to be followed, and as we have for the companies, I mentioned warning, I mentioned notification. For the companies, if 2 people from companies and 2 people from business are sitting on a table, they can order the service about the notification about all the changes in the official registry. So you can imagine, I don't know, databases from 800,000 companies and notification about some changes within the companies in the official databases. In this respect, the company appointments and of one person who is related in the business is actually the same case to check the person, is it appointed in how many, and in how many company actually. We are here to just present the outcome of our company appointment, for one person. This is the result of our development, work in progress. We hope and we are sure our next job is to establish the legal setup for this activity, because the ownership, the management should be provided by the registries together. And of course, the cooperation and the list of cooperation should be provided with, of course, with the regional chambers. We are natural partner here, and I hope that this will be very useful for everyone. I didn't mention here Romanian trade register, who is also with us. They didn't send Croatia is here also with the financial agency of Croatia, but they didn't send the data for this. They didn't have enough time to prepare the data sets for this purpose, but I hope that they will be with us. I need to just mention that in Romania there are 1,300,000 of companies in the registries. In Croatia is 200,000 also, entrepreneurs also. So the number of involved entities here in this selected databases is more than 2 million. And that is actually the capacity for the databases. I would like to thank you for your time, and I hope that the commitment of the registries shows you that the project is, and the interest is huge, the commitment is very, very, very strong, but your support and your comments and all of your suggestions in our work will be very, very useful. We know to do and to deal with the registries, but of course in real life your suggestions, your remarks are more than welcome. Thank you very much, and thank you to the EBRD for kind support in this project.
Thank you very much, and thank you. Thank you for this very concrete approach, and about also the principles you mentioned, which translate in a very concrete way in such an instrument which can have and has and can have also very big economic impact. So now we move on to our colleague from the World Bank. Your studies have been, by the way, mentioned by Prime Minister this morning, by Christian, by many others. I think they provide a very good also framework to look into the business environment in the region. So maybe you can also go into more of that.
Thanks very much for the invitation to join the panel today. And let me start with a question. Do you know the size of the untapped potential for investors in the Western Balkans? From ICT to tourism, from integration into global and regional value chains to PPPs. Investment levels in the Western Balkans average 21% of national income. That's some 11 percentage points below fast-growing middle-income countries worldwide. So, if the Western Balkan countries reach that higher investment level, that would represent some $10 billion of investment opportunities every year. In terms of exports, no small country has reached high income status with exports less than 50% of GDP. Most exceed 100% of GDP. If each of the 6 Western Balkan countries generated exports of 100% of GDP, then the increase in exports from the region would amount to some $52 billion a year. That's a lot. And we should be expecting Western Balkan countries to achieve this potential. They're close to Europe with aspirations firmly anchored in the EU. And we all heard this morning the commitment to stronger regional and global economic integration. So what is required on the soft side of the business environment to seize these opportunities? To start, good progress has already been made towards creating stable and predictable business environments. Since the global financial crisis, macroeconomic stability is largely restored, and this helps guard against shocks and reduces uncertainties for investors. Business regulations are also being streamlined. Improvements in the World Bank's Doing Business indicators is testament to this. Countries have reduced burdensome regulations by carrying out regulatory guillotines. The time and cost of registering a business has been reduced, and aspects of trading across borders and getting credit have substantially improved. Countries in the regions have also made a commitment to sound business environments for foreign investors. It's an important start. Western Balkan countries are now deepening their reforms to tackle the remaining investment climate constraints. There's a good analysis of this in some of the recent research by EBRD and the material that's been provided in the conference packet. And here, I'll highlight just 3 areas. First, making business regulations more transparent and predictable. That is, making regulations less time-consuming for businesses and enforcing them fairly and efficiently. Second, strengthening the competition framework so that there is a level playing field where firms can grow, exit, and enter. Third, fine-tuning the legal and policy framework for investment to help attract more and the right kind of foreign investment. Let me say just a few words about each of these and how substantial improvements are well within reach. For a business, the quality of the regulatory framework is not just what's on paper, but it's how it's implemented. The World Bank and EBRD's enterprise surveys includes a measure of the time senior management of firms spend dealing with government regulations. On this, the Western Balkan countries can still improve compared to other countries in Europe. Senior management in firms in the Western Balkans spend about double the amount of time dealing with regulations than those in the Baltic states. The good news is that we don't have to look far for ways to address this. Let me give you a specific example of Georgia. Concerted reform efforts reduce the time that senior management in firms spent on regulations to less than 1% of their time. This is extraordinarily low by any standard. In Bosnia and Herzegovina's Sarajevo canton, documentation, information requirements, time and cost of obtaining license and permits were streamlined. Some procedures were eliminated, and this led to a reduced waiting time for an answer from a business to governments by 18%. As a consequence, within 12 months, we saw an increase of firms being registered by close to 20%, and these firms created jobs. Regarding the framework for competition, international experience shows reform in this area matters a lot. Healthy competition among market players can open business opportunities that may have been blocked by vested interests and foster productivity, innovation, and efficiency. In the Western Balkans, competition in domestic markets is critical to further regional integration in the European Union. Several countries are already making positive initial steps towards leveling the playing field and harmonizing their state laws with European Union rules. This can be further built on by tackling areas such as product market regulation, cartel behavior, and the competitive neutrality of state-owned enterprises. The investment policy framework is also critical. The benefits of FDI do not occur automatically. Countries need legal and policy frameworks that provide transparency and predictability for the entry of investors and the startup of operations. Investor protection and retention mechanisms can encourage investors to deepen their presence in countries. This is really quite important, as globally we see that 1 in 4 investment projects are at risk of leaving a country or at least not expanding their investments. Recognizing that private investment drives growth and job creation, the World Bank Group, together with EBRD and others, supports the efforts that are underway in Western Balkan countries to enhance their business environment and in many of the other areas that have been discussed earlier today. With continued progress, we believe the Western Balkans can meet their full potential, and we are very pleased to partner in that ambition, and we hope that private investors will as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this presentation. And now maybe I will pass the floor to Goran. Last time we were discussing together, it was in a conference in Montenegro, where I was quite surprised by the fact that the room and a lot of entrepreneurs raised the question in quite an open way of corruption. And with panelists, were quite explicit also about how much should be done in that field. So it would be good if you can give us also good examples. And
actually, I do have several pieces of very good information that I would like to share. First of all, Pierre, you mentioned on several occasions today and during the day regional economic area. So whether it is good or bad, I'm to blame. So it is the Regional Cooperation Council who has drafted the multi-annual action plan on regional economic area. And we've lobbied with the Prime Minister. I'm grateful to Anna and to her colleagues that they've endorsed it. Now we are responsible out of 4 pillars for monitoring and coordination of overall efforts and implementation of 3 out of 4 pillars, as described by Christian, therefore I will not repeat. But I would like to do the announcement, what you may expect to happen, so deliverables. So the story is the story. So we are father and mother, but the story is that this year we hope to have roaming agreed by the 6 Western Balkan economies. So this is a developer number one. Second, we are working closely and are grateful to the European Commission, particularly Commissioner Gabriel. She will present the international roaming, so between us and the EU, roadmap in Sofia at the summit. So we're going to have a clear picture where we are and how fast we progress there. The third, we hope to open negotiations this year when it comes to recognition of diplomas among us, automatic recognition of diplomas, and to open negotiations on recognition of professional qualifications and standardization with the EU and among ourselves. And this is what I think of crucial importance, because when it comes to investments being mentioned on several occasions, it is very much in CEFTA hands the trade, but investments, we have worked closely with the World Bank actually, and we're going to have an agreement on which of the investments related policies are going to be harmonized. They ain't going to be the same, but are going to be very much similar in order to provide for the investors, once you are in Sarajevo, that you can hope for a similar rules of the games around, as most of you do see us as one single investment area, and we're going to continue promoting the region. Then I would like to prove what Madam Prime Minister has said. Diana, only 32% of citizens of ours, being three of us Serbs, are ready to leave. This is the lowest figure in the region. The average is 39, and on the higher side you have Kosovo 48 and Bosnia 44 respectively. But it's a good news. It is huge, but it's still, compared to what we've seen in years back, this is the very best. This is all exclusive, as the Balkan Barometer has not yet been published. We're working on analytics, but these are the data that I have after the survey been done. End of November, first week of December. So this is the moment in time and the data I'm dealing with. In general, the information is the following. After the change in government in Skopje, huge rise of optimism there. The figures are very good. Second, and I would like to share this with the Prime Minister, now after 4 years, we see the steady increase in support in Serbia among the citizens for the EU accession, and the number of those who are skeptical and negative going down. We didn't have it in 3 years before, and now we have a very good figures for Serbia that you can really share. It's a very good sign. On the bad side, perhaps because of the pre-election debate in Bosnia and Herzegovina, figures are in general very bad. The mood seems to be bad. I ain't going to go into details, but you will see once we publish the figures. Going to what you've asked me, and I really want to say a few words on rule of law and to support what you have said. How do we learn it is important? When we ask people, well, what do you care for? They will say unemployment. That's the worry which brings together Serbs and Albanians and everybody else in the region. They're all the same. The second being overall difficult economic situation. The third worry which brings us together is corruption. But after steady increase in 3 years till now, last year it was 32% of them saying corruption. Now it went down slightly to 29. It's a good news. Well, when you ask them, oh, who is corrupt? How do you see? They would say political parties. They would say judiciary. Then they would move. And there is overall negative mood. But then I'd like to share this also information with you. When we ask them, is the law applied efficiently? 70% no. Is the law applied equally to the citizens? 78% of them saying no. So this brings us to rule of law and the reform of Judiciary, Chapter 23, as a crucially important for all of us. But then I would like also, thank you for being here, to say, when we ask them, okay guys, in the last 12 months, have you had to bribe someone from the public sector? You should be proud for the figures related to Serbia. Almost 1% on different areas, 7% health sector, and 3% of them have said they paid something to the police, I guess, traffic. That's all. So actually, when you really ask them, did you pay some money? you get actually a very encouraging information. Serbia being the best, neck to neck with Montenegro, great figures for Montenegro as well. Others are not as good, but they are not bad. It's not about having money. It might be. But really, when you ask a person, so the mood and the perception is very important. But when you really ask a person, did you pay the money, you don't get the answer yes. And this is very interesting, and I just wanted to share with all of you. What we are doing regionally, coming back to your question, we have been dealing with asset forfeiture. We would like to have a regional instrument so the warrant can come from Belgrade and be fully implemented in Bosnia and Herzegovina. As you know, if you're a distant criminal in Montenegro, you need to have something like a house in Belgrade, and vice versa. If you are a distant criminal in Belgrade, you need to have a house at the seaside down there. So asset forfeiture is important, but it has to be implemented quickly, not to go through all of these proceedings, and this is what we want to do. Second is we've done corruption proofing of legislation, and we are working now with the governments in Belgrade, in Skopje, in Sarajevo. So they are implementing, with our support and regional anti-corruption initiative, who do have a specialized knowledge and expertise, they are trained to implement these, what we have defined as regional strategies. They are integrating this into their economic reform programs as agreed with the European Union. And perhaps among the last several information, I'd like to announce that we are willing and ready to do the corruption survey, fully using methodology implemented on the EU 28. They've done a survey. Look, we may turn out being bad, and it's then reality check. Then there will be a task for the Prime Minister, so they will get a clear message. This is what we have to do. We're going to use the same methodology as implemented with the EU 28. And this, I hope, will be part of the London summit, and we are already working on this tasking. Frankly, what I expect to get as an answer, but this is my 2 cents, guessing, we're going to be as bad as some of those who are already in the EU. And then we can turn this into a huge PR tool for us. Then you can go around and say, well, we are like you are, not worse than that. So I actually hope for the later to be the result of this survey, but we're going to do it, as I believe it is crucially important, because I'm still worried, and coming back to a piece of bad news, this lack of efficiency and the lack of trust in judiciary seems to be a bit of a big problem, because I've been in interparliamentary conference. I know what Christian is going to say and his bosses, and I highly appreciate and grateful for the new strategy. Hahn, Mogherini, Juncker, fine. But then I listened to what the parliamentarians and in the national parliaments in Denmark, in Netherlands, are asking, and then they are speaking about rule of law, they are speaking about corruption, alignment in international institutions with EU policies. So all of this is also part of the scene I wanted to introduce today. Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to answer whatever you might have.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Mattia, I think you are going back also to some of the challenges which were just mentioned, probably, and which have been very much studied also in our regional diagnostic EBRD has produced recently.
Correct, correct. So first of all, don't get scared. I'm not going to go through a long presentation, but I'll use just a couple of charts just to reconfirm to you, if you had forgotten, that I am an economist, so I like charts. The thesis is simple. The thesis is that creating a Western Balkans single economic space means higher competitiveness and higher productivity, and that this, together with soft connectivity, will deliver the missing, I counted 52 billion a year that Linda indicated investors would be ready and should be investing in the Western Balkans, but aren't. So why do we believe in this thesis? Well, there's a lot of evidence for it. In a sort of region where trade openness is just 65% of the trade openness of the EU 11, we need to have regional integration fundamentally to enhance trade. And there's a very, if you're one of the collectors of our beautiful transition reports, go back to the 2012 one, which talks about that and provides lots of evidence that that's the case. So we know that by creating stronger regional integration, we will enhance trade. The second thing, in a region where FDI stock per capita, which as you know is a fundamental indicator of the attractiveness of the region to really being at the top of innovation and higher sort of value added in supply chains, in a region where the stock is at 2,600 euros per capita, versus the 14,000 of the EU, we know that we need a regional integration to increase the attractiveness to FDI. For a simple reason, size. Investors want to come to markets that have size. So very simple reasons, very simple economic reasons why we believe this fundamental equation, single economic space, higher competitiveness, higher productivity. And the result is a region that can attract investors into value chains that can enhance innovation and bring the region further up on the value added they can have in supply chains. So what's going on? What are the reasons why private businesses and investors are not there? So I will show you some. Don't get too scared. I'll try to drive you through this slide very quickly. Top right corner. Customs and trade regulations are major problems for many exporters, and time and costs are the results of that. Look at the queues, trucks on borders. Anybody who's traveling in the region knows them very well. These are so much higher compared to EU average. 1 in 10 businesses in the region says customs and trade regulations are the reason why they cannot and they will not trade across this region. Bottom left. The Western Balkans region is still not well integrated into the European supply chains, and that's the reason why the FDI is not going to this region. It's simply because the companies in that region are not linked up to supply chains in Europe. So why invest there? So there's a fundamental need to integrate them there. Bottom right-hand side, weak institutions and poor governance. We use here the EBRD score for governance, one of the 6 transition qualities. This is lower than any other quality that we measure, and far behind EU members where we still operate across the countries where we operate in the EU. The problem is aggravated by the heavy presence of the state in the economy, which, as the EU strategy also points out, is really holding back the private sector. It's occupying market space where the private sector could operate. So we believe that many of the SOEs in the region are loss-making companies, they are inefficient companies, and they should leave space for the private sector to operate more efficiently. And then, last but not least, costs of doing business are still substantial. I think Linda said a lot about this, so I don't need to dwell on this point. So what can we do about this picture that may look fairly dark? I want to point out 4 areas. First, promoting a single regulatory framework for competition. We believe that competition is a low-hanging fruit in the region. It can be improved quickly. In the Western Balkans, many domestic and international companies operate already across regions, and they require a better harmonized approach towards competition law enforcement. Think about the recent mergers. There's real appetite for mergers in the region in this period. Telemakas in media, Agrana Sunoko in agribusiness, OTP Bank and Splitska Banka in banking, just some examples. So there's appetite there. We need to reduce the cost of these mergers, and this can be done, among other things, by harmonizing competition law enforcement. Regional companies exist, they're very, very large. Agrokor, of course, but Atlantica Grupa, Coca-Cola, Gorenje, based in Slovenia, of course, but operates throughout the region. Phoenix Pharma, Rauk, you name them. They need to know that when they set up a business strategy across the region, they'll look consistently by different competition authorities in different countries. And this will also reduce the costs of them operating across borders. So that's the first. The second, reducing the presence of the state in the economy, as I pointed out earlier, is crucial in supporting private sector investments through a common space. The EBRD is supporting the establishment of a common investment space platform, while it's also supporting improving governance and commercialization of state-owned enterprises across many countries in the region. I do believe that the two go hand in hand, that by reducing the space occupied by inefficient state-owned enterprises in the market, we can unleash potential for investment for the private sector. A third, encouraging projects that can have economies of scale to develop. A good example is the SEE Link. This is an innovative regional platform linking individual stock exchanges across the region. We launched it in the previous summit in February 2016. And this now covers a combined equity market capitalization of over $50 billion, allowing order routing for almost 1,200 securities listed on 7 regional exchanges. That's just one example of what you can achieve when you link things up, when you can achieve economies of scale, and that attracts investors that need the kind of scale. And last but not least, going back to the point I made earlier around trade, it's about tackling the issues of non-tariff barriers, particularly when it comes to integrating and upgrading supply chains in the region. So this then allows them to link them up into the EU. Trade Ready in Serbia is an example of something along those lines. It's a pilot. It's an EBRD initiative supported by Luxembourg and the EU, which is aimed at helping SMEs, local banks, and policymakers to boost trade and support regional development and integration. It's successful in Serbia. We're just starting it. This can be rolled out across countries in the region. So these are just 4 examples of the type of things that we believe can be done to tackle some of the issues that were highlighted during the panel. So the case, in my view, is clear. Single economic space means higher competitiveness, higher productivity, higher trade, and this translates in things we want. Yes, higher investments, but also more and better jobs and more opportunities for all. I can't resist mentioning our work on inclusion. It really rings a bell with what the Prime Minister was mentioning earlier about the 15,000 missing jobs in Serbia. These are jobs that exist and could be filled if we were able to really bring the right skills to the workforce, which is something that we're working on with the government of Serbia and others. And this will bring, of course, economic growth and wealth, but also it can bring stability. And in our view, can really contribute to the process of reconciliation as the DG for the expansion to region just mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mattia, and thank you for highlighting also the benefit of integration in the 2-dimension removal of barriers, which is in fact what we could say negative integration, by removing some obstacles which businesses and people face, but also positive integration in creating common rules, collective also, a collective way of devising and enforcing some basic rules like competition rules at a level which is more appropriate sometimes for the life of businesses. So we'll stop here the presentations, and even if you had a lot of thoughts, I suppose, after these presentations, we have 5 minutes more or less, or a little bit, to take 1 or 2 questions. Yes, there.
Since I'm on crutches, I trust you won't mind if I don't get up. My name is Tony Kachabai. I work for a talent acquisition and retention company focusing mainly on investor-backed startups. 2 brief questions, if I may. First is of a commercial matter, and that is, where do you think governments in the region lack in terms of going towards this common market, let's just call it, on both skills, but also perhaps certain regulation? And any of you could answer that. And on top of my work, I also, here in the UK, help youngsters that are traditionally not engaged in politics to encourage them to get into politics. And because of that, a question for Danielson. I've come across many people that feel the EU is not doing enough in order to encourage governments like that of Serbia and Albania sever their pasts. And when I say that, I mean, one, in terms of various people that were somehow in power or in administration under Milosevic, and also under the communist government in Albania, which are still today players. And these are people that, in those systems, committed the worst atrocities since Second World War. That is both communist Albania and the Milosevic regimes. So they're worried, why is the EU not doing enough to encourage these governments to sever these ties? Thank you.
Maybe we'll take another question before. Yes, and afterwards I have.
Hello, thank you. Uro from Dunning Institute of Economics. We do a lot of research and provide consultancy services to foreign companies investing in Western Balkan countries. And one of the main obstacles why you rarely can really evaluate whether your policies work, whether they're right, is because you lack data in these countries. There is so much data that can be collected and that could help us produce correct policy recommendations that make sense. I'll just give one example. Tax authorities are really capable of collecting a lot of important data about company ownership, about the amount they invest in employee training, what industries they operate in, so we could know whether it is better to subsidize this industry or that industry, and what is the human capital development within the companies and the progress within the corporate hierarchy. I mean, there is so much you can do about this. It's just that you need to amend certain laws and tell tax authorities, make this question in your form. So these are the things that countries can do without waiting for the EU legislation, for the chapter negotiation, whatever. Like, there are so many things that can be done at the technical level, but are not being done because it seems that always someone is waiting for some big laws to be implemented and from the EU to give advice. So question one, can you do something? We can assist, but can you do something without waiting for the EU to tell you? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So maybe I will let, I know if there are, you want to start or on the three.
I think the first question is probably not for me to reply to, yes, because if I understood rightly, it was what is holding back the reforms, if I understood rightly, if they are held back. The second one I probably could. I think that is, your question is very important, and that's why in the strategy so much of the focus is on the whole issue of reconciliation and bringing up the legacy of the past. Because I think the argument behind it are twofold. One is that these are issues that needs to be addressed in order for the region to be able to move ahead in a smooth and, if you can use the term, harmonious way. But there is also another element here which is linked to outstanding disputes that are between the countries in the region. And there is no way that the EU will take in countries who have outstanding disputes with their neighbors. And that's the other reason why the issue is so important. So therefore, that's why you read so much about reconciliation. And that's also why you will see quite a lot of efforts from our side to support our partners in the efforts of bringing up this whole issue of reconciliation.
Thank you very much, Christian. I will let you the last word, maybe.
On responding to the question?
Yes.
I did not understand what the first question was, although I did not really understand the second one either. But that's but that's okay. No, I mean, in terms of the implementation of the reforms, you know, I think I'm glad to say that Serbia is doing very, very well. You know, I think that Serbia really is the only country in the region that really implemented a very, very difficult, very painful, very politically unpopular reforms in terms of macroeconomic stability. Now, granted, we had perhaps, you know, probably the biggest problems because of the huge public debt, and granted, you know, we were 4 years ago about 3 months away from bankruptcy. It needed to be done. But the reforms were, you know, if you go to, you know, cutting pensions is a really difficult and painful reform. It had to be done because the government before that one really politically increased pensions without any really, it wasn't grounded in the economy. And the most is done in terms of the economic reforms. Now the time has come to really take a look at the reforms in terms of the rule of law, and a lot has been done in the public administration reform sector as well. But the capacities of the government, any government, be it in the Western Balkans or any other government, are limited, and the capacities for reforms are even more limited. And you have to do one thing and then the next thing and then the next thing, and it takes time. It also takes effort and political courage, and I think that, you know, many of the, in addition to Serbia, many of the other Western Balkan countries have really shown to be ready to take whatever needs to be taken to move their countries forward, not only because of the EU integration, but because first and foremost because of the quality of life of their citizens. So I think that we are on the right track, but, you know, reform take time. And they take capacities. Government cannot do it alone, and it's important for the government, and for the governments, I say this as the Prime Minister of Serbia, to be open to work with the chambers of commerce, with different investors association, with private sector associations, as well as civil society organizations, because the only way we'll do it is to do it together. So,
thank you very much. That's a very good way to close this session, and thanking all the panelists, obviously, for their very active participation and also the inspiring idea they shared with all of us. Now it's also an opportunity to continue to work on this very ambitious agenda, implement it. Obviously, EBRD is very happy to support that in all the countries of the region and at the regional level. And I'm sure that we'll have other opportunities before the next summit also to deepen this very ambitious agenda. So thank you very much.